Continuing along with our goal of trying to construct a metric, a yardstick to evaluate the efficiency of an outcome in the market, let's move to the producer side. We constructed a tool called consumer surplus, but now we want to think about, is there a way to measure the net effect of the existence of this market on the producer? Now, you might say, well, Larry, how about that being profit? Profit is a good proxy for it, but it's not quite enough, and hopefully within the next 2 or 3 minutes you'll understand why. We're going to, again, assume no government right now, so all we have are consumers and producers. Those are the only agents in our market, and therefore that's really all we have to concern ourselves with if we're trying to evaluate what's the net impact of the existence of this market on society. So the first term we're going to define today is producer surplus, PS. We'll use PS in the future. And producer surplus has a sort of a clumsy definition, but it says it's the net revenue above what is needed to have that unit of production on the market. It's the net that the firm is getting above and beyond what it has to have to put that particular unit on the market. So let's think about this in our favorite way to do it, which is on a graph. What we're trying to come up with is a number that tells us if there's some residual the firm is walking away with. And you can say, well, maybe there is. Didn't you call that residual profit? Again, I think by the time we get done with this next picture, we'll have a better idea. So we have our typical supply function here. And suppose we start with some arbitrary price in the market of P0. This price of P0 will produce a market output of cap Q0. But let's focus on one of these interior outputs. Imagine this particular output point here. Let's call this output point alpha. For output alpha, we know that in fact, if we had just offered the industry this price piece of alpha, they would have given us that unit alpha. That's what the supply curve says. The supply curve, go back to day one. The supply curve says how much will producers willingly put on the market for different possible prices. You call out different prices and we know that curve is upward sloping in this two-dimensional depiction. But what it also means is that for every point here, there is a price that we could have gotten that product for if we had just offered that price. That's what the supply curve says. If you don't believe that, then you did a bad job of constructing your supply curve. You must believe it someplace else. But for this particular construction of the supply curve, which is the sum of the marginal cost curves of the players in this industry, we could have had, as society, we could have had alpha for that low price. Instead, they actually earn this price. Suppose that the price in the market is, let's say, $1.50. And this price here is actually 65 cents. Well, what that means is that for this firm, we've got an 85-cent premium. Okay, it would have sold that unit alpha for 65. The market would have sold you alpha for 65 cents. But since the market price drove it to $1.50, this vertical gap of 85 cents is exactly what this definition is saying. What's the net revenue above the amount it would take to have had that unit of production actually appear in the market? In this case, it's 85 cents. We could have chosen a different one. How about beta? Beta looks like costs are higher. We know that the supply curve is the sum of the marginal costs. We know that the law of diminishing marginal product means it's getting increasingly expensive to produce this product. And therefore, the firm, in this case, the firms would have needed something like, looks like about $1. If we had offered them $1, they would have given us beta. Instead, they get $1.50, so they're netting this. We don't need to continue with this. You can see that if you were to sum up all of these, this would be producer surplus. And so the definition of producer surplus on the graph is that producer surplus is the area above supply that is marginal cost, but below price. The firm is getting the market price, and from that market price, subtract the marginal cost associated with that particular unit, and you have producer surplus. Now, many times in this little video, I've mentioned that it's not quite profit. You see, this gap is the difference between price and marginal cost. It doesn't have anything to do with fixed cost, and that's because in the short run, it doesn't matter. We're stuck with fixed cost no matter what. Whether you produce zero, whether you produce this, whether you produce that, the fixed cost is the same, no matter what level you produce, even if you lock the doors. And so that's really irrelevant to our analysis here. Okay, that money's already been spent. That's what fixed cost means. It's out the door. And so what we're doing is we're looking on the margin at the outcome that eventually will arrive, because we still haven't put these together, to see where the sum of what at the outcome that the market arrives at, or a perfectly competitive equilibrium, what's the sum of the surpluses to consumers and the sum of the surpluses to producers. That's going to produce a pie, a big steaming pie of net value. Okay? And what we want to do is make that pie bigger and bigger and bigger. The more efficient our market outcome, the bigger that pie is. We're going to find out in a minute. If you don't like the allocation, you can go back later with a sharp knife and cut it up and move it all over the place, taxes and refunds and rebates and everything else. But right now, we're thinking about just how does the market work its magic in terms of rationing these products.